Hi, everybody. I am here. We are going to finish chapter 2 and hopefully get through chapter 3 today of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. All right, now I'm not going to do a big summary every single time because hopefully you're reading along or following along. So here's Mr. Tumnus, who admits that he's a bad fawn because he's a kidnapper. And it becomes apparent that he is in the process of kidnapping Lucy. "Daughter of Eve, don't you understand?" said the fawn. "It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it now this very moment." "What do you mean?" cried Lucy, turning very white. "You are the child," said Tumnus. "I had orders from the White Witch that if ever I saw a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I have ever met, and I've pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her." "Oh, but you won't, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "You won't, will you?" Indeed, you really mustn't." "And if I don't," he began, beginning to cry again, "she's sure to find out, and she'll have my tail cut off, and my horns sawn off, and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hooves, and turn them into horrid, solid hooves, like a wretched horse's. And if she is extra and especially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall only be a statue of a fawn in her horrible house until the 4 thrones at Carpervel are filled. And goodness knows when that will ever happen, or whether it will ever happen at all." "I am very sorry, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but please let me go home." "Oh, of course I will," said the fawn. "Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what humans were like before I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch, not now that I know you. But we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamp-post. Perhaps you can find your way home from there, back to Spare and Wardrobe." "I'm sure I can," said Lucy. We must go quickly and quietly as we can," said Mr. Tumnus. "The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side." And then here's a picture of the woods and the lamppost. Okay, show that to you guys. And there they are, racing back to the lamppost in that picture. They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put up his umbrella, and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not at all like the journey to the fawn's cave. They stole along as quickly as they could, without speaking a word, and Mr. Tumnus kept to the darkest places. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamp-post again. "Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve?" asked Tumnus. Lucy looked very hard between the trees, and she could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. "Yes," she said, "I can see the wardrobe door." "Then be off home as quick as you can," said the fawn. "And can you ever forgive me for what I meant to do?" "Why, of course I can," said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. "And I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account." "Farewell, daughter of Eve," said he. "Perhaps I might keep the handkerchief?" "Oh, rather," said Lucy. And then she ran toward the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs could carry her. And presently, instead of the rough branches brushing past her, she felt coats. And instead of the crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards, and all at once she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe and into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her, and looked around, panting for breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. "I'm here!" she shouted. "I'm here! I've come back! I'm all right!" Chapter 3. Edmund and the wardrobe. Lucy ran out of the empty room into the passage and found the other three. "It's all right," she repeated. "I've come back." "What on earth are you talking about, Lucy?" said Susan. "Why," said Lucy in amazement, "haven't you been wondering where I was?" "You've been hiding, have you?" said Peter. "Poor old Lou, hiding, and nobody noticed. You'll have to hide longer than that if you want people to start looking for you." "But I've been away for hours and hours," said Lucy. The others all stared at one another. "Batty," said Edmund, tapping his head. "Quite batty." "What do you mean, Lou?" asked Peter. "What I said," answered Lucy. "It was just after breakfast when I went into the wardrobe, and I've been away for hours and hours, and I had tea, and all sorts of things have happened." "Don't be silly, Lucy," said Susan. "We've only just come out of that room a moment ago, and you were there then." "She's not being silly at all," said Peter. "She's just making up a story for fun, aren't you, Lou? And why shouldn't she?" "No, Peter, I'm not," she said. It's a magic wardrobe. There's a wood inside, and it's snowing, and there's a faun and a witch, and it's called Narnia. Come and see." The others did not know what to think, but Lucy was so excited that they all went back with her into the room. She rushed ahead of them, flung open the door of the wardrobe, and cried, "Now, go in and see for yourselves." "Why, you goose," said Susan, putting her head inside and pulling the 4 fur coats apart. "It's just an ordinary wardrobe. Look, there's the back of it." Then everyone looked and pulled the coats apart, and they all saw, Lucy herself saw, a perfectly ordinary wardrobe. There was no wood, no snow, only the back of the wardrobe with hooks on it. Peter went in and rapped his knuckles on it to make sure that it was solid. "A jolly good hoax, Lou," he said as he came out again. "You have really taken us in. I admit, I half believed you." "But it wasn't a hoax at all," said Lucy. "Really and truly, it was all different a moment ago. Honestly, it was. I promise." "Come on, Lou," said Peter. "That's going a bit far. You've had your joke. Hadn't you better drop it now?" Lucy grew very red in the face and tried to say something, though she hardly knew what she was trying to say. And then she burst into tears. For the next few days she was very miserable. She could have made it up with the others quite easily at any moment if she could have brought herself to say that the whole thing was only a story made up for fun. But Lucy was a very truthful girl, and she knew that she was really in the right, and she could not bring herself to say this. The others, who thought she was telling a lie, and a silly lie too, made her very unhappy. The 2 elder ones did this without meaning to do it, but Edmund could be spiteful. And on this occasion he was spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy, and kept on asking her if she'd found any other countries and other cupboards all over the house. What made it worse was that these days ought to have been delightful. The weather was fine, and they were outdoors from morning to night, bathing, fishing, climbing trees, lying in the heather. Okay, by bathing they mean like swimming. But Lucy could not properly enjoy any of it, and so things went on until the next wet day. That day, when it came to the afternoon and there was still no sign of a break in the weather, they decided to play hide and seek. Susan was it, and as soon as the others scattered to hide, Lucy went to the room where the wardrobe was. She did not mean to hide in the wardrobe, because she knew that that would only set the others talking again about the whole wretched business. But she did want to have one more look inside, for by this time she was beginning to wonder herself whether Narnia and the faun had not been a dream. And the house was so large and complicated and full of hiding places that she thought she would have time to have one look into the wardrobe and then hide somewhere else. But as soon as she reached it, she heard steps in the passage outside, and then there was nothing for it but to jump into the wardrobe and hold the door closed behind her. She did not shut it properly because she knew that it was a very foolish and silly thing to do, to shut oneself into a wardrobe. even if it is not a magic one. Now the steps she had heard were those of Edmund, and he came into the room just in time to see Lucy vanishing into the wardrobe. He at once decided to get into it himself, not because he thought it a particularly good place to hide, but because he wanted to go on teasing her about it and about her imaginary country. He opened the door. There were the coats hanging up as usual, and the smell of mothballs and darkness and silence, and no sign of Lucy. "She thinks I'm Susan, come to catch her," said Edmund to himself, "and so she's keeping very quiet at the back." He jumped in and shut the door, forgetting that it was a very foolish thing to do. Then he began feeling about for Lucy in the dark. He had expected to find her in a few seconds, and was very surprised when he did not. He decided to open the door again and let in some light, but he could not find the door either. He didn't like this at all, and he began groping wildly in every direction. He even shouted out, "Lucy! Lou! Where are you? I know you're here!" But no answer, and Edmund noticed that his own voice had a curious sound, not the sound you'd expect in a cupboard, but a kind of open-air sound. He also noticed that he was unexpectedly cold. And then he saw a light. "Thank goodness," said Edmund. "The door must have swung open of its own accord." He forgot all about Lucy and went toward the light, which he thought was the open door of the wardrobe. But instead of finding himself stepping out into the spare room, he found himself stepping out from the shadow of some thick, dark fir trees into an open place in the middle of a woods. There was crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying on branches of the trees. Overhead there was a pale blue sky, the sort of sky one sees on a fine winter day in the morning. Straight ahead of him, he saw between the tree trunks the sun just rising, very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he were the only living creature in that country. There was not even a robin or a squirrel among the trees, and the woods stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He now remembered that he had been looking for Lucy, and also how unpleasant he had been about her imaginary country, which now turned out not to have been imaginary at all. He thought that he must be somewhere quite close, and so he shouted, "Lucy! Lucy, I'm here too! It's Edmund!" There was no answer. "She's angry about all the things I've been saying lately," thought Edmund, and though he did not like to admit that he had been wrong, he also did not much like being alone in this strange, cold, quiet place. So he shouted again, "I say, Lou, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. I see now that you were right all along. Do come out and make it Pax." Still there was no answer. "Just like a girl," said Edmund to himself, "sulking somewhere and won't accept an apology." He looked around him again and decided he did not much like this place, and had almost made up his mind to go home when he heard far off in the woods a sound of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last there swept into sight a sled, drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked white compared to them. Their gleaming, branched horns were gilded, and they shone like something on fire when the sunrise caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather and covered with bells. On the sled, driving the reindeer, sat a fat dwarf, who would have been about 3 feet high if he'd been standing. He was dressed in polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. His huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. But behind him, on a much higher seat in the middle of the sled, sat a very different person, a great lady, taller than any woman Edmund had ever seen. She also was covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long, straight, golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white, like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. The sled was a fine sight as it came sweeping toward Edmund, with the bells jingling and the dwarf cracking his whip and the snow flying up on each side of it. "Stop!" said the lady, and the dwarf pulled the reindeer up so sharply that they almost sat down. They then recovered themselves and stood chomping their bits and blowing. In the frosty air, the breath coming out of their nostrils looked like smoke. "And what, pray, are you?" said the lady, looking hard at Edmund. My name's Edmund," said Edmund, rather awkwardly. He did not like the way she looked at him. The lady frowned. "And is that how you address a queen?" she asked, looking sterner still. I beg your pardon, your majesty. I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know the Queen of Narnia?" she cried. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter. But I repeat, what are you?" "Please, your majesty," said Edmund, "I don't know what you mean. I'm at school, at least I was. It's the holidays now." "But what are you?" said the queen. "And are you a great overgrown dwarf who has cut off its beard?" "No, your majesty," said Edmund. "I never had a beard. I'm a boy." Now, we're going to stop there. I want to show you the picture. And if you remember yesterday's reading, or, well, even today's, I should say, you can probably guess who that rather stern, scary woman is. All right, you guys, that's it for today. I'll keep reading. I'll try to do some reading this weekend and post them for you guys so you guys can follow along and have a great weekend. It is sunny outside. I see blue sky, so get outside and enjoy it. And I'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.